Hey everyone, I'm Peter Rawls and welcome to Boise State in the Community. Joining us tonight is Dr. Justin Vaughn, who's a political science professor here at the university. Hello Justin, how are you doing?
Great, Peter. How are you?
Doing just fine, thank you. Now to start things off, what's your education background and what brought you to Boise State?
So I grew up in Illinois, a town called Kankakee, which is just maybe 45 minutes, 50 minutes south of Chicago. I went to college in Illinois at Illinois State University, got my master's degree there. I went and I got my PhD in Texas and had my first job out of graduate school in Ohio. I was there for several years, and then an opportunity to come here came. A friend of mine from graduate school was already a professor here. He really enjoyed it, liked living here, and so the opportunity came to interview here. I came out. I liked the city, immediately, and then things worked out. So I moved here in August of 2012 and have been here since.
Oh, that's great. And what got you interested in politics and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so like I said, I grew up in Illinois, and in Illinois, you can't really go anywhere without seeing pictures of Abraham Lincoln, right?
Oh,
and
really?
my family would always take vacations and stop at historical sites and Civil War battlegrounds and so on, and so I just kind of naturally got interested in history and political history, and then through kind of becoming interested in Abraham Lincoln, American presidency, and as I got a little bit older and I was in high school and college, I really found politics interesting, and listening to talk radio and watching political shows and arguing with my friends about politics, and then it just kind of turned into a major and then a profession.
Oh, wow. So what courses do you teach here at Boise State?
So I teach a presidential politics class called the Chief Executive, and I typically teach a legislative politics class, which I usually will focus half on the United States Congress, half on the Idaho legislature. And so I'm teaching the Chief Executive course class this semester, which is interesting because we have a new president and a president who's very different from what we're used to over not just the last several years, but the last few decades. And so it's been an interesting time to talk about the idea of the presidency, institution of the presidency, and then also the specific developments of Donald Trump's presidency. I have for the last few years also taught a foundational studies class. I think this is the last year I'll do that for a while, but that's been interesting and kind of evolved in how I thought about that class and interacted with the students who take that class, and then I've been teaching lately some applied workshops, some workshops that are skills oriented. So it's not just taking a course, gaining knowledge, taking exams and writing papers, but it's also developing specific skills. And so I taught one of those about public opinion polling and how students can use polling and develop some skills in that arena before they graduate. I'm doing one this semester about political advocacy, how you can use different communications techniques and skills to try to get your preferences successfully recognized by our political leaders, whether that's in the legislature or in the city or country or whatever. And we'll probably continue to do classes like that where students are not just learning facts and information, but also the ability to do certain things in government or in politics after they leave school.
So what other kind of coursework for your political classes happens in there besides talking about current topics?
Yeah, so for example, the presidential politics class I'm teaching this semester, we spend a little bit of time every day talking about developments, but we don't talk about them in the sense of, oh, did you see what happened yesterday? It's more of, okay, what happened yesterday? And then how does that relate to some of the bigger concepts and trends in the American presidency or in American politics? And so we read, usually just about for every class, I have one or two recent media articles that I'll have people read that talk about Donald Trump and a specific aspect of his presidency. But then they'll also read some debates that focus on the topic, right? So earlier this week, we talked about the relationship between the president and the Supreme Court, and in particular on how presidents nominate justices to the Supreme Court or to the other federal courts. But it also happens that Donald Trump recently nominated a justice or potential justice to the Supreme Court. And so there's debates over how powerful the president should or shouldn't be in that process. There's interesting developments that we talked about how confirmation politics have changed over the last several decades, how presidents have put different kinds of judges on the court in the last several decades, how the Supreme Court's taken a different, more active role in American society in the last several decades. And so it's really kind of a combination of, analyzing how things are changing, what that says about what's going on specifically right now with Donald Trump's presidency, but then also some bigger picture kind of conversations about if the current way is the best way or the right way, or if there were better ways in the past or could be better ways in the future to do different aspects of that particular institution.
Wow. Is there any courses that are not being taught in the political science aspect that you think that the university should be teaching?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think that and actually, fortunately, in the last couple of years, we've hired some new professors with, new kind of very modern skills that are focused on topics that have become more interesting to political scientists and political science majors in the last several years that we didn't have before. So, for example, if we had done this interview a couple years ago, I would have said, I think we would need a political psychology class. But because we hired somebody that has that skill, they're offering that now. Or someone who we didn't used to have somebody who was able to teach about interest groups and political parties, but we have that now. And so I think we've got pretty good coverage of the key topics in political science. But I think we could do more to evolve the different ways in which we teach that, and we're pretty strong on teaching students the academic side of it, but I think we can continue to invest our time and resources in also offering additional opportunities for the applied side of it, or the technical side of it. And so not only have a course, for example, about interest groups and their role in society and how interest groups are successful and why they do what they do, but then also a course where someone is taught how to do the kinds of things that people who have jobs in interest groups do, so that when they graduate, they're ready to get that good job right in that field and not have to graduate and then say, oh, I know a lot about interest groups, but I don't actually know how to do the work that an interest group would want me to do. And then get that experience, and take 2, 3, 4 years before their careers can really take off.
And with the current, kind of changing political environment, have you noticed that students have been getting more engaged or asking more questions about politics?
Yeah, I think there's a lot more interest, especially this spring, in politics than there might have been a year ago. In some ways, that always happens when there's presidential elections and there's a new president. Americans can pay a little bit more attention to politics in the fall and winter of a presidential election year. But then with this particular presidency, it's been very controversial, right? The people who don't like the current president are really dissatisfied. The people who like him really like him. And so there's really kind of polarized and strong attitudes out there. And I think that probably would turn into more people thinking about politics, not just as college students, but in high school and junior high, and then being more like me when I was in high school, going into college, thinking, oh, I really enjoy this, really find this interesting, I think it's important. Maybe I should take a class on American government or on political campaigns or something like that. So other events will do that too. When September 11th happened, 15 years ago, a lot of people got interested, not in politics necessarily, but in international relations and in learning about the Middle East and in thinking about terrorism and economic development and poverty and all these different things that go together. And I would imagine that initial burst of attention that those fields got right after 9/11, years after 9/11, has probably diminished because there hasn't been a similar event like that, thankfully. But if there were to be another big event of some kind, whether it's like that or an economic collapse or whatever, that I think it would make people, it affects the way that people think about what they're interested in, what's important, what they talk about, what kind of jobs they want to do. And one of the things with the recent economic crisis that we had 8 years ago, a a lot of it's changed a lot of way. It changed the way a lot of future and current college students approach their degrees. It made them, I think, for the last several years, students much more focused on majors that there's a clear kind of career path afterwards, and so you saw a lot more people getting interested in business and in technical aspects of different majors. When the economy is good and people are less worried about their marketability or whatever, then there's maybe a more interest in majoring in philosophy or English, where you can certainly have a good career and you certainly learn a lot of things that are valuable for your careers, but there's not necessarily an immediate direct connection to an entry-level job as a philosopher or as an English speaker, right? Just out of college.
Yeah. Now transitioning to more of the work that you do in the community, we spoke earlier this week about something with the Boise's Farmers Market. What are you doing with them? Yeah,
so there's two Boise Farmers Markets. There's a kind of a big one that's called I think the Capital City Market. And then there's a smaller one that's newer, and it's just been in the last few years that it was formed, called the Boise Farmers Market. And it meets in a parking lot around, I think, 10th and Main Street or so. And I really like that one, and I like the people who organize it, and I like the people who sell their produce and other goods there. And I got to know some of those folks. And then I was teaching a foundational studies course one semester, and foundational studies encourages their faculty to find ways to have the students taking those classes engage in their communities. And so the farmers market, the Boise Farmers Market, was developing this program that they called the Sprouts Kids Club. And the idea was a kid from, I don't remember the exact ages, but let's say 5 to 10, can show up at the farmers market on a Saturday morning, and they sign up for this program, and then every Saturday they come, they get a couple of little wooden nickels, and they can take those little tokens and go around and they can trade them in for an apple or a pepper or a pear or whatever, or plants or something at different stands. And so, and then they come back and they tell the people who hand out the tickets or the tokens what they bought, and then on different Saturdays there's activities like teaching them how to make a salad or watermelon seed spitting contests or whatever. But it's a way to kind of get kids interested in it, and also to get them to learn about eating healthy and about vegetables and things they may not want to eat as a 5 or 6 or 7-year-old, but that get excited about in different ways. But it costs money, right? Every time a vendor gives out a free apple, it costs them something, right? And so my foundational studies class decided to develop a project that raised money for this program. And so over the course of the semester, we learned about the program, came up with a plan, executed the plan, and by the end of the semester, we had finished this fundraiser. And I don't remember the exact amount of money, but it was a few $100 that we were able to give to this organization. And that really helped sustain that program for a few months that year, and that allowed them to seek out other funding mechanisms, and so it's that program now a few years later is still going really strong, and they've got more children participating in than ever, and they have community partners to help them pay for it. Recently, the director of the farmers market reached out again and said, "We're thinking about some other new ideas. One of the things that they've been thinking about for a couple years is how they go from a market that starts in April and goes till November, how they go 12 months a year, right?" And that, of course, you can't be doing an outside farmers market in January, right? So where do we do it? They've been thinking through those strategies, and they know they need statistics about certain things that people who give grants will want to see before they give grant money. And one of the statistics they need to know is how many people come here every Saturday, what times do they come, what kinds of things are important. And so she reached out to see if I had any take on how Boise State students or faculty or combination may be able to be involved in helping execute a project like that, so that at the end of the summer they would have really good statistical evidence about exactly when they're popular and who comes and what kinds of people enjoy it, so they can then take that information and put it in their grant proposals, and try to get community support to expand that market to becoming a year-round thing.
Wow, and have you done these kind of things before, or is this the first time working with, a community fundraising opportunity?
No, that was the first time really as a professor to do something like that, and it was interesting. And I think that a number of my students liked it in a way that I didn't know if they would. But it was fun, and I didn't want to say I want to do a fundraiser every semester, right? And I haven't done something like that since then. But it has been good, just even enjoyable for my career to make those relationships and then have them come back later and say, oh, we really valued your contribution and your insight on a particular problem or challenge, and maybe you can help us out again. And even if it's not in my area, my research has nothing to do with farmers markets or attendance at community events or anything like that. I can say, oh, well, I think you should talk to these two people or this organization or this faculty member who may be able to do a better job of helping you. And so since then, I've done some other things that are more kind of engaged with the community. The School of Public Service, which the Department of Political Science is a part of, has over the last year done 3 big public opinion studies, 2 different ones, one just recently, one a year ago, about public opinion concerning key policy areas in the state among adult Idahoans. And then one was focused on the Treasure Valley region, so our part of Idaho, and what people thought was important about the Treasure Valley, what they liked about living here, about the economy in the area, key policy areas in the community. And so it's been really interesting to, instead of doing my research, which is for other experts in presidential politics at other universities and writing articles for journals and books that other professors will read, it's been interesting to take those same kind of research skills and use it to analyze key policy issues and challenges in the state, and then go talk to state legislators and the governor's office and community leaders about what the people think about what's the important issues, what they would rather see their leaders work on more or less, what they think about if they want certain kinds of programs, do they want to pay for those programs, how do they want to pay for those programs. So that's not something I envisioned doing when I was doing my PhD in Texas, but it's been pretty gratifying and enjoyable to do over the last year or so.
That's great. Now, shifting back to your work, you've written a number of books and articles talking about politics. What got you interested in writing about the stuff that you've learned?
Well, so, you go to college and you decide that you're interested in this, you want to go get a graduate degree, get a PhD, you decide, oh, well, I got this PhD, I better, use it. You go be a professor, and you teach classes, and obviously all college students know that professors teach classes, but what they don't necessarily know is that that's really usually only about 1/3 of their job. And if you want to keep your job, not only you got to teach classes, but you also have to do a lot of research, and you got to publish that research. And then you have to have your peers and that are scholars on the same topic as you around the country say if it's good or not, right? And so part of why I started writing is because I have to, and that's part of every academic's job. But then, it's also interesting, right? If you're the kind of person that, decides that for a living you want to think and write and communicate about something that you find important, then you don't mind writing. And professors have a lot of freedom in the things that they want to write about, and so I've been fortunate that over the last several years, almost everything I did up until very recently focused on the presidency, but in different things, different ways. And as my interest in the presidency changed, or I thought that something became pretty interesting, I could write about that. And so when I left graduate school, I was doing a lot of stuff about how presidents speak to the people and their relationships with public opinion, and also about how presidents structure their administrations so that they can make sure they're managing their employees well. And then over time I got a little bit less interested in those things, but I became more interested in how presidents are portrayed in pop culture and what that means for our American society. So I wrote some things about that, and then kind of got interested in the relationship between media and the presidency, and wrote some stuff about that. And so most recently, I've written a few small things with a good friend and colleague of mine at a university in Texas about the idea of presidential greatness. Who are our best and greatest presidents, and why, and what does that mean? And so I'll probably in the next year or so finish a book about that. Something has been on my plate for a couple years now, but as these things like these surveys and projects for community organizations come up, you push it down a few weeks, and then a few more weeks, and a few more weeks. And so hopefully this year is the year I'll finish that project. But as far as I know, for the foreseeable future, I'll keep writing things about the presidency, but typically on what I'm interested in, or what I think it's important for a political scientist to talk about, right? One of my colleagues was telling me something just yesterday about an issue that was coming up in the state, and he said, "I'm an expert in this area. I know a lot about it. I think I know why this is a good thing or a bad thing, and I'm going to take my skills and my talent and write a piece about this, and hopefully my piece will have some impact, right? Because he knows more than most people do about that particular issue, and that I think is something like that is really invigorating for a lot of experts, that you want to produce knowledge for knowledge's sake, but then when you have an opportunity to take your expertise and make a difference in something that you think is really important, then, and you're able to do that it is rewarding.
And now I know that politics, there's a lot of things that stretch beyond the classroom. Are there opportunities for students to do things outside of class?
Yeah, absolutely. So just like most majors, there's internships. I happen to be the internship coordinator for the political science department. And so I always encourage students to do internships, try to help them find the internships based on what they're interested in and what they want to do after they graduate. And so, right now, for example, the Idaho State Legislature meets every spring, and we have, a dozen or so students that are doing internships at the state legislature. And that's a highlight for political scientists every year. But there's always opportunities on campaigns, there's opportunities for interest groups, there's opportunities in law offices, opportunities in lots of different places. And so you learn a lot doing that. You can get academic credit during doing it. But that's just one way. There's also student groups. There's a political science association. There's a political science honor society. There's organizations that are on campus that aren't necessarily related to the political science department itself, like the College Republicans or the College of Democrats. And so there's lots of different ways that students can to do things outside the classroom, sometimes for credit, to learn and have fun and get to know some of their classmates and in their major or outside their major that are related to that overall topic of politics.
That's really great. And my last question for you is that we spoke earlier this week about a new course about campaign commercials and videos. Mm-hmm. Is that a new thing that's coming to Boise State? So
it's probably going to be a workshop that we would do this fall. And so I teach a class, I co-teach it with a guy who is a professional political consultant. So he's not an academic, he's not a professor. During the day, he's giving political candidates advice on what kinds of media ads to do, how to talk about certain issues, and so on. But then during the last couple of fall semesters, he and I have co-taught a class about how do you actually do things on a campaign, and what are the skills that you need in order to be a useful, employable person in politics. And so semester's 16 weeks, and so we usually will cover 12 to 15 key topics during the course of the semester. One of those topics that we've taught for the last couple of years is we brought in a professional TV ad guy who has taught the class about how he does political advertising on TV. And I thought, boy, there's so much. We're only getting to the tip of the iceberg. So last fall, he talked for 3 hours and just got the tip of the iceberg, right, and I thought, there's so many things that we weren't able to talk about. Like, okay, you've made your ad. How do you buy airtime? Right? How do you know when to advertise? How do you know what channels to advertise on? Right? We didn't get a chance to talk about any of that stuff. We didn't really talk about a lot of the technical side of it. We really talked about his perspective as more of a director and a person who strategizes what needs to be in the ad. Right? He hires editors, he hires photographers to do the technical stuff. And so I thought, well, if we're going to teach this class again in the fall, and we're going to have him come up again and teach one night, it might be cool if we can also have him maybe that weekend or other nights that week teach a workshop just for 1 credit that students who aren't political science majors who aren't necessarily interested in campaign politics, but maybe interested in media or advertising or technical communication or various different things. They might say, oh, it'd be cool to spend 2 or 3 nights or a weekend or something studying this with a guy who is a pro. And so hopefully we'll be able to pull that off. That's one of my goals for the fall. We'll see if the stars align and we can get everything scheduled the right way.
Well, that sounds great. I really hope that comes together for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, we have just run out of time, but I just want to thank you so much for joining us today, and I wish you all the best in all your future endeavors.
Well, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, that's all the time we have for you today. I'm Peter Rawlis. You've been watching Boise State in the Community.